In our planning, we all realized that we needed to maybe take the organization to the next level.
And passion for what we care about, whether it's being able to speak up or whatever the issue of the day is. There's just a lot of passion about what we care about.
I've lived on words.
It's a very complex industry that we work in, and we have such a responsibility to really think about what we're doing because it's powerful.
The spirit is the same. This crosses 75 years, and yet the spirit lives on even though the times and the circumstances are different.
In 1929, students at the University of Texas Journalism School founded the Chi chapter of Theta Sigma Phi, an honor society for female journalism and communication students. For the next 7 decades, TSP, which later became known as Wiki and then AWC, created important and groundbreaking programs and generated countless educational and networking opportunities. The chapter has been home to some of the most influential communicators of our time, but even more important, has created an environment where members could learn, grow, and help one another along the way. In 1973, the Austin chapter launched its longest-running program, the Banner Awards, which recognizes outstanding performance in various communications fields. The awards are presented each year at a favorite homecoming event, the annual Banner Brunch. The Austin chapter has won the National Outstanding Chapter Award 12 of the past 15 years and is one of the most vibrant professional organizations of its kind in the city. During the summer months of 2004, many long-term members of the chapter gathered to talk about their memories of AWC and the role of women in communications.
Well, it came out of my journalism days, you know, at TWU. She and Clyde had been both incarcerated, shall I say. And so I was a journalism major, and I got to go scared to death. And I believe she's the toughest looking one, and here she is with a cigarette hanging out the side. You know, sitting like this, and I'm thinking, oh, you know. And she just starts, well, when me and Clyde was hot and on the Dodge, well, we just thought that was the most wonderful expression, you know. My family picked up all these expressions, so people in the family were hot and on the Dodge for months.
As the world changed, our members were at the forefront, blazing trails. The first female reporter at the city desk paved the way for an aspiring young sports writer, and a presidential press secretary opened doors to the founding of a national museum.
You know, women were welcome suddenly for 2 reasons. One, the war was on and men were going away. And the second was Eleanor Roosevelt had started being the first lady that had press conferences. She wiped out discrimination by discriminating. She had only women.
I started out as a cub reporter on the San Antonio Evening News during World War II. As one of the first 2 women to go in the city room.
In a complex and dynamic world, AWC has been a guiding light.
I was totally consumed for many years with the Equal Rights Amendment and getting it passed, and so was Women in Communications as an organization. We were a leader in this. I participated in the last great ERA march in Chicago. First time I realized that I wasn't equal was when I graduated. And I wanted to go into television news because that was my degree. And I couldn't get a job in Austin because women did not have authoritative voices in 1968.
One of my vivid recollections is when I was working at the Daily Texan at UT. I was one of the first women in the sports department there, and I was assigned to cover one of the football games, and it was very exciting to sit in the stadium and cover the game, and this would have been in 1977 or so, generations ago. And after the game, the tradition is that everybody takes the elevator down and you go to the locker room and you do your interviews. And I went down to the locker room and the players are coming in and I was going in too. And the guard stopped me and said, "I don't think so," and picked me up and moved me over to the side. And so everybody else trailed in and I did not go into the locker room. And obviously, you could not have an 18 or 19-year-old girl in the locker room doing interviews as players were taking showers, because this is how they would do their interviews. They would strip off their uniforms, they would take a shower, and they would talk to the reporters. Instead of writing a story about the game, I got to go back and write a story about being thrown out of the locker room.
I remember.
Which ultimately got way more attention,
Yes.
and turned out to be a little bit more interesting than
Was that
anything
you?
any of the
Yes,
players that
I
was me.
remember that. I remember it.
So I ended up having this war of words with Darrell Royal. Not a person I would wish to have a war of words with, but I was 18 and would fight with anybody. And as the upshot of that was that today nobody goes in and interviews players while they're taking off their clothes and taking a shower. Instead, the players go into an interview room and everybody of any gender who's covering the game does the interviews there. It's equal access for everybody. And it's shocking that it was ever considered appropriate for anybody to be standing there doing interviews while you're naked, but that was the norm.
And it's a game, I think, a great deal like life, and that it demands a man's personal commitment, be toward excellence, and be toward victory.
Well, I think the doors that were opened by professional women in Austin led to the doors of being entrepreneurs, and that so many of the women in communications today are doing it on their own, either as freelance or they own businesses, they own public relations, advertising, communications, media training businesses. So they're both business owners and communicators at the same time. A lot of the laws that changed helped that, being able to get credit in your own name, being able to get a startup loan. And those were things that were opened in the last half of the 20th century. And so that probably has made a big difference in communication and the way women work in it. Well, I look to the wonderful women that I got a chance to know here in Austin, like Annie and Liz Carpenter, Ann Richards, and people that I've had a chance to work for or work under and do projects for. I'm really also looking at the extension of the women's movement in America to global issues. I think it's time American women who have a lot of rights and opportunities reach out to women around the world who do not, and perhaps be the peacemakers of the future.
We now live in an age where there's such a cult of personality that the person who delivers the message, there's such a strong impetus to be that person. And that's not historically who we have been. It has much more been a support profession.
Secret Service man comes down the steps of the airplane. No, new President Lyndon Baines Johnson with his wife Lady Bird. Coming down the steps, they are followed by Johnson aides, including Mrs. Carpenter, Mr. Phil Moyers.
In 1963, Liz Carpenter authored one of the most memorable speeches of the 60s, a 58-word, 7-sentence text that Lyndon Johnson delivered at Andrews Air Force Base after he stepped off the plane which carried the coffin of John F. Kennedy.
Jerry McNamara, I think, who just leaned over and affectionately kissed Mrs. Johnson.
Though I've written thousands of words, those were the 58 most important. But, it proved to me that once a reporter, always a reporter, you think in terms of what is the need going to be. And sitting in a car outside of Parkland Hospital, waiting for LBJ and Lady Bird to come out after the death had been announced of JFK.
Microphones are just about 4 feet back from an encased area for the press.
He's going to be asked what he thinks of this at some time to react. And I must say, God was my ghostwriter, because the words came.
This is a sad time for all people. We have suffered a loss that cannot be weighed. For me, it is a deep personal tragedy. I know that the world shares the sorrow that Mrs. Kennedy and her family bear. I will do my best. That is all I can do. I ask for your help and God's.
And I didn't realize how much it would mean later in life to me. At that time, he was just living the moment and still in shock from the assassination. He used them, and they were right.
I think a big part of communications today is you're called upon to do part of a speech, but that may be the key part of the speech. And you've got to do the research and the background and be sure you're right, because it's going to be everywhere. And you've got to know your business, but that is your business to do that. And you don't get the credit.
The cult of celebrity is very strong now, so you're seeing much more communicators taking the front seat.
Since you had your own bureau, you had a little more flexibility after.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, my daughter, I think, was conceived in our office on a slow news day.
Story of how she decided to be a working mom, and she had just given birth to her daughter, and she wanted to breastfeed, and well, she would shut the door and pump during the day, and her big ex-NFL football player boss walked in on her while she was doing it. Do you remember that story? She was mortified, he was mortified.
And she said that she'd seen him exactly 3 times or whatever, because he was the executive director or whatever. Mm-hmm. The other time she saw him was the same day in the elevator. They couldn't get apart from each other.
Well, working moms have their stories.
Yeah, that's right.
I remember my mother always seeming to be there, but she was always working too. So,
yeah, how do you swing that?
Well, I just never did think about not working, so I just made it all happen. But I did have a fairly flexible schedule a lot of times, and could be home pretty soon after my children got home from school, which was a great help. But I remember feeling kind of guilty about working so much, and so I was apologizing to my children, and Ann said to me, "Well, we don't want you at home all the time." So I felt a lot better about that.
I always appreciated all the wonderful stories that she would bring home from the newspaper that we wouldn't have had if she hadn't been there.
Well, I don't guess anybody's ever balanced home and job that hasn't felt guilty. I mean, I feel guilty, and yet I know my kids have a broader view of the world because they knew a lot of remarkable women, and they'll tell you that. I think that you miss out if you miss any of it. And you know, I've nursed a baby and dictated a story over the phone, and it wasn't all that tough. I think we can do both, and we have the kind of quick communications techniques that you can do that.